Can we trust our favorite authors? Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Now for today's video, I'm going to be testing out the theory of whether we can trust author blurbs. Now, if you guys don't know what an author blurb, it's basically when there is a book and then on the cover, there is a short little blurb from an author. And they usually talk about how they felt about the book and why they would recommend you to read it. So I picked up a lot of books that were blurbed by some of my favorite authors, and I'm here to tell you if you should trust the blurbs or not, and to give you my take on the books that I've read with blurbed by my favorite authors. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so the first book that I want to talk about is this one called Are We Nearly There Yet by Lucy Vine. Now, Lucy Vine is a UK romantic comedy author that is not that popular here in America or in Canada, but I love UK British romantic comedies because they're just so funny. They're always filled with very dry, witty humor. One of my favorite authors that are from that country or from that side is Sophie Kinsella. So Sophie Kinsella writes really funny romantic comedies, and I would literally read anything and everything by her. So I saw that she blurbed this book and she said it was really, really funny. So I decided to read this book. And I think me and Sophie Kinsella were reading two different novels because I didn't think that this was that funny after all. This book involved our female heroine being kind of stuck in a rut. She is working a dead-end job, so she decides to kind of just break free and go on vacation and have a ton of fun. And it's one of those find yourself kind of types of novels. It's more borderline women's fiction than a romance novel. And overall, once again, it just wasn't funny. And our heroine was kind of being really annoying to me because she was being really rude to her friends at certain points, even though she was wrong and she wouldn't admit that she was wrong. And it's just overall not my type of story. But I'm excited to read more Lucy Vine novels because there are a lot of reviews on Goodreads where they did say that Lucy Vine is very funny. So maybe this one just missed the mark. Okay, so the other book that I was holding up prior to this was this one from Sebastian. This one's called A Delicate Deception. And I read this one last year, but I kind of forgot about it, but I kind of do still remember it. This one's blurbed from one of my favorite historical romance authors, Lorraine Heath. She said, if you haven't read Sebastian, what are you waiting for? And I feel like that this was just such a generalized blurb from Lorraine Heath that the publisher Avon Books just like slapped it on to like random Sebastian books. It definitely doesn't tell us if Lorraine actually read this book or not, but it does tell us that Lorraine Heath knows Sebastian and that she has read her works prior. So does she really recommend to read this book? Probably not, or probably do, I don't know. But A Delicate Deception is a friends to lovers romance, basically. What happens is that our heroine is from the big city, but she decides to go retire to the countryside where she likes to take long walks on like hills and meadows and to really embrace nature and things like that. There she meets like a guy that always interrupts her daily walks and kind of take up a lot of room in her life too as well, because he's just so big and he just is like a golden retriever type of energy. He keeps following her around and she's just like, please leave me alone, I'm just trying to be by myself. But then they form an unlikely friendship where they get to know each other, and then obviously they slowly fall in love with each other. If I remember correctly, our hero is actually really intelligent and he's like kind of like an engineer, and he wants to figure out the train systems in like London so then they could properly transport materials and things like that. And she's very attentive and she always listens to him because she enjoys the conversation that they have with each other. So overall, this was actually a really sweet romance, and I did make me want to read more Sebastian novels. I know a lot of my friends have read her before and they really enjoyed it. So yeah, I guess I can trust Lorraine Heath's blurbs, even though Avon took a really generic one and pasted it on a historical romance. Okay, so the next book we have here is Heartbreak for Hire by Sonia Hart, and this one was blurbed by Lyssa Kay Adams, which is the author of the Bromance Book Club series. Lyssa Kay Adams said, wow, romantic comedy doesn't get much better than this. So I read this one last year as well. This one is an office enemies to lovers romance kind of thing. What happens is that our heroine actually works for the secret organization that is set out for revenge for exes. So basically, to become a client of the company, you would have to have a thing that you want to do to enact revenge. Like you want to have someone pay for the things that they did to you, and then these girls kind of go out and then they make a fool of your ex, basically. So it's a all-female firm, and she likes it that way because she doesn't like to be dominated in the workplace by males and then have males kind of walk all over her ideas. But then her business leader decides to expand the business to hire male employees so that he can work for like the male clients or something like that. So what ends up happening is that she actually meets him on a case, and then she pretends to be somebody else, but then they meet each other in the office, and then he ultimately feels betrayed because he thought that she and her had this really strong connection, but turns out she's been faking it all along. And then she doesn't know how to explain herself because she does feel that strong connection, but then also at the same time, a job is a job, and she doesn't want an office romance. So when Lyssa Kay Adams said that this was really funny and romantic comedy doesn't get better than this, I know you can't really judge a book by its cover, but based on this cover, you would think that it's more like women's fiction, something more serious. But I have to admit, Lyssa Kay Adams did blurb the book correctly. This book was filled with a lot of humor that you wouldn't expect from a cover like this. It's filled with crude humor at times. It's always focusing on a female's body parts. It's filled with wacky scenarios where a female gets stuck in silly situations that do make you giggle a lot. And it's just overall a fun, lighthearted novel. So can we trust Lyssa Kay Adams? For this one, yes, she hit the nail on the head for this one. Okay, so another book that I have here is It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. Obviously, this one is kind of a controversial novel on my channel where I didn't like the book, but a lot of booktubers and a lot of readers have loved this book, has put this book on their best books of 2021 list, but I personally just didn't like this book. If you guys didn't know why, it's basically because I didn't like the grumpy sunshine trope that happened between our two characters. I thought our hero was way too vapid, and I thought the enemies to lovers aspect of this book was over marketed because they were literally enemies to lovers for maybe like 3 seconds, and they immediately fell into a friends to lovers situation. It overall was really dry and boring for me because it focused too much on him fishing, and it was just like a small town romance that was just left something to be desired for myself. And there's just like a lot of certain things that I was just, how is this a Tessa Bailey novel, was what I was asking myself. But anyways, this book is just blurbed by Sally Thorne, and she said, books by Tessa Bailey are an insta buy for me. And Sally Thorne is the author of The Hating Game, which is another book that I didn't like. So what I want to say about this one in particular about the author blurb is that Sally Thorne, Tessa Bailey kind of fall into that same category for this book for me because I didn't like The Hating Game and I didn't like this book. So I guess if Sally Thorne blurbs another book, I could be like, maybe it's the same vibe as The Hating Game and I wouldn't like it. But specific to what she said about this book, or about Tessa being very generalized once again, I agree. Tessa Bailey, it will still always be an insta buy for me because the books that I did read by Tessa Bailey, I really enjoyed. There's a certain writing style that Tessa Bailey does that I really enjoy. And obviously she does a great job at like the smutty scenes too as well. So obviously Tessa Bailey, still auto buy for me, but for this book specifically, I never trusted Sally Thorne in the first place, so therefore it was my mistake for reading this book, I guess. That's a joke. I still would read Tessa Bailey. Okay, so the next book that I have here is this one called The Shoddy Set Up by Vale. This was a book that I read last year too as well. I don't know if I talked about it. This is a second chance romance. Yes, this is a second chance romance between our two characters, and they basically had this really whirlwind romance in high school, but then they ended up breaking each other's hearts really badly. They both have dogs, which is really interesting, and they meet each other again in their adult years. Our heroine actually has a boyfriend in this book, and her boyfriend is not like the best boyfriend, but I wouldn't describe him as to being the third wheel or the enemy or the person that she needs to get rid of, because he is actually very attentive. He listens to her and he gives her things and he treats her really nicely. There's really nothing wrong with him, but I guess it's just like deep down that connection that she has with her boyfriend versus with this guy from high school is just different, and she feels a stronger connection to our hero. And so what's interesting about this book is that she actually keeps her relationship a secret from her family for some reason, and then her mother thinks that she's single, so her mother tries to set her up back with the high school sweetheart. So this one involves kind of like emotional cheating and like, you know, we're borderline taboo of like this could be deemed as cheating. So it wasn't like my favorite novel. It was like kind of a 3 out of 5 stars for me. And when I saw the blurbs blurb by it, it kind of made sense. So we have Sarah Hoggle, who is the author of Twice Shy, but then she is also the author of her debut novel called You Deserve Each Other or something like that. And Sarah said, hilarious and emotional and an absolute treasure of a love story. So Sarah is a kind of a borderline author for me. It's not like I wouldn't read her books ever again, but it's definitely I read with hesitation, because You Deserve Each Other was a book that just infuriated me. It gave me like nightmares, not nightmares, but I definitely ranted a lot to my friends. And that's when you know I hate a book so much that I have to talk to my book friends about how bad the book is. But You Deserve Each Other was just not a good one for me because it was just pure hate and it was like no loving. And then Twice Shy was better. So with this quote, I'm like, okay, Sarah, see similarities between this book and Sarah's books being like more borderline wrong. And then we have another one from Farah Heron, who is the author of this Accidentally Engaged, and she said funny, sexy, and so full of love and addictively readable. So Farah's books are average read for me too as well. She started writing books for Forever Romance, and I feel like she got in better into the groove of romantic comedy, and I can see Farah and Lily's writing to be somewhat similar, but it's still like not the perfect best conclusion to a happily ever after for me and Farah's books and Lily's books. So I can once again see the similarities between the blurbs and how the publishers are picking out who to blurb on the books in terms of writing style and in terms of execution as well. Okay, so the next book we have here is this one from Loreta Chase. This one is called 10 Things I Hate About the Duke, and it's part of a Difficult Dukes series. I think it's just a duology because I didn't see book number 3 published anytime soon. But this one is blurbed by Julia Quinn, and she said one of the finest romance authors of all time. So once again, Avon Books is giving us the most generic blurbs from authors who have not read the book probably, and they're just slapping it on there for like a marketing technique, which I think is not that great, because this one is the same blurb as the first book in the series called A Duke in Shining Armor, and it literally says the same blurb from Julia Quinn on the cover too as well. I don't know where my copy of A Duke in Shining Armor is, so I only have this book. So A Duke in Shining Armor for me, that was a 5 out of 5 stars, or at least a 4 out of 5 stars for me. I really liked that book because it was so hilarious how our female heroine was being set up with the hero in this book, and she would rather run away or die than to marry this hero. And so she jumps out of the window after being intoxicated, and then our hero's best friend from this book, so our hero's best friend, leaps after her and then ends up falling in love with her during their 2-day trip whirlwind romance situation. So that's what happened in that book. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really funny. I thought it was really cute. I thought it was really realistic too as well, because our hero there was like, I'm falling in love with my best friend's fiance. That this is totally morally wrong. For this one, this is what happens when our hero loses his bride to his best friend, and he just completely loses himself. Like he gets really bitter, he gets really angry by the end of book 1, and this is his story of finding true love. And I just felt that our hero needed to do so much more to redeem himself, because in book 1 he was just intolerable. He was just something that I just couldn't stand, and I hated him. And so this one, it was an okay job for me with Loreta Chase. The story was just average for me, like it wasn't the best. And our heroine, who is very strong and very stubborn, she's being forced to marry our hero in this one. So now this is kind of like an enemies to lovers romance. I know Rachel from Rachel Reads and Sings really liked this book and put this book in her best books of 2021, but this one wasn't. And once again, can I trust Julia Quinn's quotes? For Loreta Chase, I read 3 of her books so far, and they were mixed reviews. I had one that I really liked, and then the other ones, I was just an average read for me. So yes, Loreta has credibility because she has written a lot of books in the past, and I'm sure they were very popular in the past. But for me, Loreta will still remain near the bottom of my TBR. Next book we have here is Boyfriend Materia by Alexis Hall. So this one is an romance involving our character who is the son of a famous rock legend, and then he has to learn to kind of have his own identity because his dad was very famous back then, and then he's trying to get a grip on his life. He's definitely very type B. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's kind of living in a messy situation. Meanwhile, our hero is a put-together lawyer, type A personality, has his own career set, is making a lot of money, paying for things, and doing big moves in his life. So this is a complete opposites attract romance that I really enjoyed. I thought it was really fun written because these two characters kind of started bickering back and forth a bit, but then they slowly kind of got in closer, and then obviously they developed feelings for each other. So it really made me interested in reading more Alexis Hall novels. Overall, this was just a 3 out of 5 stars for me because there were things missing in this book. However, Christina Lauren did blurb this book. They said, hilarious, witty, tender, and stunning. I love this book. So this is very personalized because Christina Lauren literally said, I love this book, which is really great. And I completely agree with them. Hilarious. Yes, it was. There were so many moments where I laughed out loud. Witty, of course, because there was witty remarks and banter. Tender, yes, they had very nice moments together where it was just very soft and very cute, and it made my heart flutter. And stunning. So I guess it was just a very stunning novel for a debut with source books. So I really enjoyed this one. It definitely set up the stage for more Alexis books to come. Okay, so the next book we have here is this one called The Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels by India Holton. And this one was blurbed by Jenn Deluca, and she is the author of Well Played, Well Met, Well Matched, you know, that series. And she said delightfully bonkers. Now for this one, I completely agree with Jen. Now we don't know if Jen actually liked this novel because I feel like sometimes with authors, they're told to blurb books and then like they read the book and obviously they have their own personal opinions towards that book. Maybe they didn't like it as much, but like they still want to blurb it because they want to help a fellow author out, etc., etc., etc. So delightfully bonkers can be taken into like different ways. It could be like delightfully bonkers as in like, yeah, it was crazy, but it was okay read. Other ones was like, you know, delightful, meaning maybe it was really fantastic. So we don't know what she really means by this, but I would have to agree with Jen. This book was crazy. This one involved our heroine who is a part of like this society, or she is just solving crime, and she's very uncharacteristic for a lady back then in that time period. She holds a lot of guns, and there was like so many scenes where she would just like whip out a gun and she can just, you know, fire off her targets and things like that. Meanwhile, our hero is an assassin. So this is kind of like a enemies to lovers romance too as well, because they're both fighting for a cause, and I think he wants to try to kill her. I think that was the plot. Like, I honestly didn't like this book at all, and I forgot about it. It was very disappointing for me, but it was definitely not as disappointing as this other book that I've read from Berkeley Romance Historical, where like the houses were floating. I forget if this is the one where the houses were floating. Another blurb on the back is this one called The Most Charming, Clever, and Laugh Out Loud Funny Book I've Ever Read All Year by Martha Waters, author of To Have and To Hoax, which is a book from Gallery Books that I haven't read yet, but that one has horrible ratings on Goodreads. So I don't know if you want Martha to be quoting your books. Okay, so the next book that I have here is this one called The Kindred Spirits Supper Club by Amy E Reiser, and she's the author of The Optimist's Guide to Letting Go. I've had several of Amy's books on my bookshelves, but I haven't had the opportunity to read it yet, so I wanted to read her latest novel, which was from Berkeley Romance. I think this was published last year because I remember reading this last year. I thought that this one would be really interesting because our heroine actually can see ghosts, and she is just having like normal day-to-day conversations with ghosts, and then she ends up seeing our hero's grandmother's ghost, and then they spark up like this unlikely friendship, and the romance starts blossoming. But I feel like that this book leaned more towards women's fiction as opposed to, you know, really cute contemporary romance that I was truly expecting. It definitely dealt with our heroine's emotions a lot more, and then also like the storyline between our hero and his family, because if I remember correctly, his family is actually really rich, and he has like a lot of expectations set for him to do well in the future. So this one was blurred by Emily Henry. I love Emily Henry. I love, you know, People We Meet on Vacation. And what's the last one? That Beach Read. Obviously, I love Beach Read. So Emily Henry said, a heart-squeezing love story with a perfect sprinkling of mystery and magic. So I kind of agree with her. It had mystery and it definitely had magic because our heroine could see ghosts, but I wouldn't say that it was a heart-squeezing love story. I felt like there were some tender moments, but it wasn't, you know, Emily Henry's novels where I was rooting for our characters to be together in the end, where I wanted that childhood friends to lovers romance to blossom in the pages like Emily's books. So overall, I think we can trust Emily because we can tell that she has read the book because she talked about the mystery and the magic part, but I don't have similar sentiments to Emily's feelings towards this book. Okay, so the last book that I want to talk about is this one called Incense and Sensibility by Sonali Dev. I love this series. This series is basically a Jane Austen retelling, and like the first one was like Pride, Prejudice, and Other Flavors. That was like 400 something pages. It was so slow burn, but it was so beautiful. And then she has another one that I completely forgot called Recipe for Persuasion. So definitely that's a retelling of Persuasion that I also enjoyed. It had a sprinkling of sports romance, and it also had a sprinkling of celebrity romance too as well. So this one is a retelling of Sense and Sensibility, and then it involves our hero who goes through something very traumatic. He is a presidential candidate, or he is a candidate for the election, and he goes through something traumatic, so he needs to zen himself out because he's starting to have PTSD from it. So then he asks our female heroine, who used to be his love interest, to help him with like yoga and like breathing exercises and things like that, and then they spark up their romance once again. And obviously they see each other's previously like their faults. They explore that once again to get over those issues. So this one was also a blurb from Emily Henry too as well. This one, she said, the kind of book you finish with a whole body, happy sigh, and a warm ache in your chest where the characters will live on. So yes, I completely agree with Emily Henry, even though this was a general blurb for all of Sonali Dev's books, because her books are just like so feel good once you finish it. Like you feel like it's a completion, like you feel completed in life. You feel that your characters have earned their happily ever after. All the villainous characters are, you know, pushed away properly, and you just feel so good wrapped up in Sonali's like writing too as well. Her writing definitely flows and it's very addicting and you can't stop. So yes, I agree with her that you just want to finish it in like one sort of sitting too as well, because you're just addicted to it as you're reading it. For this one specifically, I think this one took like a little bit longer time for me to get into because I wasn't really too sure if I wanted to read a book about politics, but for Sonali I definitely did. And I overall enjoyed this one too as well. Maybe not as much as the first couple of books, but this one I still enjoyed it. But anyways, that is it for my little video where we read through author blurbs and we see if they match against the books and if we can trust the author blurbs overall. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys again next time in a new one. Bye.